because they never expected Trump to win. Once Trump won, then the next question was, okay, how do we sabotage him going forward? So they'd already laid the foundation that Russia was involved, and the Steele dossier was one component of that, but they persisted in building the circumstantial case that Trump was involved by, saying, "Oh, here's Mike Flynn. He's talking to the Russians." So all of this, they didn't have it planned out in advance of we're going to go from here to here to here to here. But what the documents that Tulsi's releasing now show is that there was direct intervention, both at the direction of Obama from the White House, and then with Clapper and Brennan interfering and directly inserting themselves into the clearance process, overruling analysts. Now, it's one thing to if you've got a factual basis and get overruled by a director of CIA, that's a problem, and that's exactly what Brennan did. It's another thing that if well, this is just our opinion. That this wasn't based on opinion. They said we don't have any evidence to support that claim. And so that's pretty egregious.
Yeah, sorry, folks. The power went out of my house, so I lost everything. We're trying to get everything rebooted at the moment. So I'm on my phone so that we can continue going on there. Thanks for the pickup, Gary. I appreciate that. I want to, though, before we get into this whole issue on Brennan and Clapper, because I think they may be the two most egregious violators of this whole thing and deserve special scrutiny, I think. I want to show you something from John Kiriakou, who's also a former CIA officer, who we've had on the show in the last month or so, but he was on the PBD broadcast and made an interesting comment about Brennan himself.
John's the guy. John says, I want to be CIA director. The liberals went crazy. They said, absolutely not. He was one of the godfathers of the torture program. Obama says, okay, I'm going to make him deputy director of the National Security Council, deputy national security advisor for counterterrorism. Then he started doing the kill list. Well, by 2012, the liberals forgot or didn't care or whatever, were distracted. They make him CIA director, and then he starts just wreaking vengeance on all of his enemies.
Wow.
This is a bad guy. John Brennan is a very bad guy. From day one, he was a bad guy.
Who liked him in the CIA?
Yeah, that's good enough there, Gary. You should watch the whole. I recommend anybody watch that whole interview there. It's absolutely fascinating. But Larry, you also have some interaction with John Brennan. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about. Do you agree with what John Kiriakou said?
Oh, 100%. Brennan was not trained as an operations officer. He was trained as an analyst, and he was a pretty pathetic analyst. He first showed up, a friend of mine, Pat Lang, who's now deceased. Pat was the defense attaché in Saudi Arabia when Brennan was posted there as a young analyst, and he did a terrible job. So it was only years later that Brennan went back there as the CIA chief of station to Saudi Arabia. This was 95 when the Khobar Towers was blown up. And back then, Brennan would not allow the CIA station base, which one of my classmates was the chief of base, would not allow them to collect intelligence on terrorist threats. Brennan shut that down because he was getting, let's call it, some favors out of the Saudis. Then I ran into him again in 2004. Every year, the State Department Bureau of Counterterrorism would put out its Patterns of Global Terrorism report. Now it's called Country Reports on Terrorism. And they provide the statistics, how many groups, how many attacks, whatever. So I'd get it, I'd go through it and read that and just keeping track of the data. Well, I got to the back page and noticed all of a sudden, you got to November, the terrorist incident stopped. And there had been actually a major terrorist attack in Russia in November the previous year that I remembered. So I called up Joe Reep, who was the press guy at Counterterrorism Office, and he went, oh my God, because at that time, Colin Powell was running around saying, look, how great we're doing. The terrorism incidents are down. Well, they were down because you forgot to count a year's, 2 months worth of data. And the guy that was in charge of that was none other than John Brennan. He was the head of the Terrorist Threat Integration Center. He said he failed to properly check and ensure that the data was right, which was his job. He was in charge. 2007, there was efforts to, I was asked at the time, surprisingly, by the Hillary Clinton campaign to see what information I could get out of Indonesia about Barack Obama and his adoption by Lolo Soetoro. Serendipitously, good friend of mine, Chris Whitcomb, Chris, who'd been a member of the FBI hostage rescue team and now was doing contract work for CIA, he was doing training in Indonesia. So he said, yeah, I'll get what I can. He reported back. It had already been cleaned out. It was cleaned out by John Brennan, his company. So, when Kiriakou, and I know John pretty well, we're friends. When Kiriakou says that Brennan's a bad man, he's not exaggerating. Brennan's a very bad actor.
And so let's look at what do you know about DNI Clapper? And then I'm going to get into some specific questions here.
Clapper is just as bad as Brennan. I only know of Clapper secondhand from Pat Lang. Pat was the chief of the Middle East division at DIA when Clapper was the head of DIA. So he directly worked under Clapper. And he didn't have a kind word to say about the man. And then we saw Clapper lie before Congress when he was asked about spying on Americans. He absolutely knew they were spying on Americans. So, he could be the poster boy for the deep state.
Yeah, I'll actually never forget that when he just looked the camera right in the eye and just flat out said, we absolutely are not spying on Americans. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the Snowden release that confirmed that there was a massive spying on Americans. And then, and instead of him being held accountable, because that was the first thing I thought was, okay, well, he's going down, and literally nothing happened at all. Right.
Yeah, no, they've been twisting and turning intelligence for years, and it's always been for political purposes. The fact that the way I learned about what Brennan was doing at CIA with respect to gathering the intelligence, it came through one of my other friends, a retired CIA officer. He had been he'd been overseas in a lot of hot spots, including Beirut, Lebanon, when the CIA chief of station, Buckley, was kidnapped and murdered. He was in El Salvador during that war. So he'd been in a lot of operational places. And he's the one that called me up and said, hey, I just got off the phone with one of my contacts who's still there. And this guy was approached by Brennan, asking him to be part of what they were then calling the Trump Task Force. So they'd put together a task force to go after Trump. And
okay, so let me ask you then, based on what you've seen from the documents that Director Gabbard has released, what is your assessment of what Clapper and Brennan did with information they knew to be false, if my understanding is correctly?
Yeah, they published it. They published it as if it was true, with the imprimatur of saying, hey, this is the CIA community judgment. So that carries some weight. Then all the newspaper, well, if the CIA says it's true, it must be true. And because I've been through a lot of the documents that Gabbard has released, but not all of them. But she said in some of her testimony or some of her press briefings that she has emails that show that Brennan and Clapper both knew that the Steele dossier and the DNC hack was not the way it was portrayed, and yet they used it anyway to have intelligence assessments. Is that accurate? Well, yeah, they knew. I'll give you an example. I was hired by attorney Ty Clevenger to help him in a case where one of his clients is being sued by the family of Seth Rich. And so he'd been asking the FBI and the intelligence community for information about Seth Rich. And initially they denied, oh, we don't have anything. Then, good Lord, this is, I want to say this is 7 years ago. He got a letter where they admitted that they had 15 documents, NSA documents, that were classified top secret that they couldn't share with him. So I checked with my friend, the one who was connected on the inside. I actually was having dinner with him, and I showed him the letter. He started laughing. He goes, 15? We got a lot more than that. So they knew. They knew Seth Rich was in touch with Julian Assange. They knew how the whole thing had happened. They have the intelligence documents. It's there. Just a simple matter of declassifying them.
And okay, so now the whole issue here that Director Gabbard's raising is that this was an Obama-driven attempt to unseat Trump. So now how do you go from where those things are with the Steele dossier, with the DNC stuff, and the Russiagate, et cetera, to getting him out of power? Because you mentioned the impeachments. The first impeachment was primarily over whether or not he used Ukraine to try and gain get a quid pro quo, et cetera. How do those things tie together?
Well, the reason I think she's saying that Obama directed this is because of that meeting that took place in early December after Trump won. Everybody was caught completely unawares that with their pants down, and nobody expected Trump to win. It was that. So when Obama calls those people into that meeting and basically says, okay, we need to produce an assessment showing that Donald Trump, that the Russians pulled this off for Donald Trump. It was all done for the purpose of discrediting him. Look at the subsequent actions that Obama took. They started collecting, they were monitoring Mike Flynn's phone calls. So they took the information about what he said to the Russians. They imposed sanctions immediately on Russia, kicked out a bunch of diplomats, seized property. All of this was creating this narrative that Russia had interfered when the actual intelligence showed the exact opposite, that they had not interfered. I mean, for God's sake, when you look at the amount of interference that we do as a country in other elections overseas, my God, the Russians would have to go to school on us. The U.S. method for starting a color revolution. So this was, again, the plan was to dirty Trump up so that, one, he could not seek any kind of rapprochement with Russia. Because you got to step back and say, well, why were all these foreign intelligence services? Why were the Brits, the French, the Belgians, the Germans, why were they willing to cooperate with the CIA going after this potential presidential candidate? Because they feared that Trump was going to do what he's doing now with respect to NATO. That he was going to soften up the U.S. was going to back away. The Europeans would have to take a bigger responsibility, and even the possibility that he might get out. And the only way you can counter that is, by God, those Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And so to arms. So that's why they were looking for anything that they could get on Trump. That, he wasn't paying attention. I mean, that's on him. He had all this information, could have released it. He didn't. But the people around him, Mike Pompeo, John Ratcliffe, Dan Coates, who was the first ODNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Pete and Rick Grinnell, none of them collected the information, even went out of their way to say, hey, let's go back and take a look at this. This seems strange to challenge it. None of them.